Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Mauricio Vera. I'm the Assistant National Director of the Veteran Institute for Procurement. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. We are very excited about bringing you this series of continuing education workshops that begin today. These workshops were developed to give veteran business owners the opportunity to take a deeper dive on important and relevant market topics. The series of workshops over the next couple of weeks will be broken up into 4 sessions with 4 stellar instructors, all with the theme of identifying relevant opportunities and developing an effective pipeline. These are, of course, very important steps that you should take in helping you grow your business. This workshop is brought to you by the Veteran Institute for Procurement in partnership with the Small Business Administration and the Veterans Business Outreach Centers, and was developed to help veteran businesses accelerate growth in the federal marketplace. As many of you know, VIP offers 5 different curriculums to give veteran-owned small businesses the tools they need to win government contracts. Participants receive hands-on market-based instruction that helps establish best business practices for federal government contracting. The programs, as you know, are offered at no cost to veterans nationwide, and we are currently accepting applications for all 5 VIP programs, and our next in-person class is going to be VIP International at the end of March, and we are still taking applications for that class, so if you're interested in exploring opportunities outside of the continental US, please be sure to apply soon. For more information on how to apply and on all of our programs, be sure to visit our website, which is at www.nationalvip.org. With that, I am thrilled to introduce our distinguished speaker for this morning, and that is the iconic Miss Ann Sullivan. Let me tell you very briefly about Ann Sullivan. She is the founder of Madison Services Group Incorporated. She brings over 40 years of government relations experience in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives, serving in key advisory roles. Ms. Sullivan works with the United States Congress and the administration to garner national attention for the small and mid-sized business community. And just sort of a logistics, please submit, if you have questions, please submit them during the presentation in the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box that can be found in your Zoom toolbar. We're going to address questions at the end of Ann's presentation during the Q&A portion. Also, please note that the slides and video recording from today's session will be emailed to you. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to turn it over to Ann Sullivan. Ann, welcome, and thank you for
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mauricio. Well, let's just get right to the matter at hand. I'll just tell you a little bit about us on the next slide. Our company, which I started 20 years ago and which my daughter is now president of, focused almost primarily on government contracting, because that is a difficult subject to understand and it's got a lot of tentacles. And small business was kind of an afterthought at least 20 years ago. It now is kind of on the tip of every politician's tongue, but that's due to a lot of hard work and a lot of educating and a lot of advocating. So that's really what we do. We do a lot of other things too, but that's primarily what we do. And that's why I'm giving this webinar, because follow the money is something that I think really escapes small businesses. If you're going to do government contracting, and if you're a government contractor, you have to know where your funding stream comes from. And lucky for you, almost everything in the government is transparent and public. So the information is not a mystery, generally speaking. The information is all there, but the trick is, how do you find it and how do you make sense of it, right? So that's what I'm hoping that will that will become clearer to you in this webinar. The last part of it that I'm going to talk about is just a different way of elevating your company that maybe you haven't thought about in the government contracting world. It's really elevating your company through congressional activity. It's not PR, but it's kind of close to that idea, which is to talk about yourself and your story and your company in public forums so that you get much more recognition than you might otherwise do. And of course, I think we all know or understand that standing out from the crowd is a big part of being a successful contractor. So let's go to the next slide. By the way, large companies hire teams of people to do what I'm going to show you today. It's called business intelligence, is the fancy word for what we're going to discuss. And that's understanding the budget and the appropriations process in the Congress. Now, why on earth do you want to know that? Well, the reason is that, again, all the statistics, mostly all the programs, all the requests, all the directives from Congress are all public. And so it would behoove you to get a jump on your competition by understanding where the programs that you're either pursuing or that are currently funding you, to know the status of them. And so let me start by just explaining the process to you. It's a little bit, dry, so I hope you don't fall asleep through this, but I promise you it'll be worth it if you start catching on to how to do this. So let me the first thing that happens in the budget and appropriations process is the president puts out, I say his because there's been no female president. So he puts out his budget request. And this year it'll be March 9th, or it's expected to be around March 9th. And the budget request that the president releases is his wish list about how the Congress should allocate the money that they're going to spend and give to agencies, and his priorities. So there's your first clue, right? It doesn't mean that the president's budget is going to be enacted. In fact, it won't be. It's just the beginning and kind of the first shot across the bow about what will get funded in the next fiscal year and what may not. And as I said, you'll start seeing priorities, right? Which is really important if you're thinking about pitching an idea or building an idea that an agency is already thinking about. You can find that in the president's budget. The media, by the way, will tell you on March 9th, oh, they're going to eliminate this program. No, the president's budget is not going to get enacted. It's what he's proposing, and the Congress appropriates the money. So the president does not have power of the purse, it's the Congress. And the budget is, while it's, boy, talk about dry, but you can go, it'll tell you about agency budgets. You can identify priorities and trends. So it'll have an explanation. It's not just a bunch of numbers. It'll say something like, clean energy is a priority of the administration, and we've told every agency to take steps to enact it across the board in their programs. Let's say that's what it says. Okay, so that's a clue, right? You start digging further down into it. You start talking to the agencies about what is their clean energy initiative exactly going to be, or what do they envision? You just got a jump on your competition that's sitting around waiting until the Congress appropriates the money at the end of the fiscal year, or not recently, but for the last 46 years, almost every year, it's been around Christmas. So you don't have to wait until the Congress actually acts. You can figure a lot of this out and get clues by following this process. It also talks about new initiatives, this budget, right? So the president's proposing the new initiatives, but it's something that the agencies are going to be looking to implement. It's going to talk about consolidation and elimination as well. So let's say the program that funds a contract of yours. Let's say the agency or the president's budget said, we are allocating nothing for this program because we think it's duplicative. Okay, so that means you better start talking to the people in the Congress about how important the results of this program are and why it ought to be funded, because if not, they may just agree and eliminate it. So there again, saving your own program could be one of the things that you're trying to accomplish. If a program is going to be eliminated, remember the president's budget is telling you, if you read it, right, it's telling you what the agency would like. So again, big red flag, but also a way to ingratiate yourself with your contracting folks. You can go, they can't fight for the program. They can't lobby Congress, the agency can't, but the contractors can, the supporters of programs do, right? They can talk to Congress, so you can actually fight for your programs that fund you in the event that there's elimination, and tell your agency that you've communicated support for the program. That goes a long way toward it. Let's go to the next slide. Here's how you find it. By the way, you're getting all the slides, but the OMB, Office of Management Budget, is the office that releases this, and that's where you find it. You can find the budget on March 9th, www.whitehouse.gov/OMB/budget. And you'll have to do a little digging around in it because it's very comprehensive. And it can be very, you'll have to hunt and peck a little, but my trick for you is to do Control F or Control Find and just go through the document until you find what you're looking for. And it's done by agency. By the way, the president's budget is kind of a big general document, but then in the coming weeks, they release a very specific agency by agency budget, and it's usually on the agency website. So let's say you are funded by SBA. You may not find anything on specific programs in the president's budget request, but a couple of weeks later, you'll find on the SBA website, you'll find a broken down, a pretty specific budget explanation of what the SBA would do to implement the budget that the president requested. And that's really where you find programs that they want to eliminate, or programs that they want to beef up or consolidate. That's the other thing, right, that you need to worry about is my program that's funding me, is it up for being consolidated with something else? I might lose my contract, or at least it won't be renewed. It's just something you need to watch out for. So I think we've covered the president's budget, right? So just to recap, president's budget does not get enacted. It is the first shot across the bow about what the president wants, but Congress is the one that appropriates. So let's go to the next slide. The next section is about appropriations. And yeah, the media is the worst at mixing this up. They use budget and appropriations interchangeably, and it's not. So it's sometimes really hard to follow if you're just like reading an article or watching the news. It's really hard to figure out, is it an appropriations, or is it the president's budget, or is it the congressional budget? what are they talking about? And they often mix it all in, and it's kind of difficult to discern. So we're just going to go through the appropriations process next. So next slide. So I've put in this slide the difference between a budget resolution and appropriations. Now stay with me, don't fall asleep at this because it's a little dry, but a budget resolution in the Senate and the House, it does not, it passes the House and the Senate, and all it does is put out really big numbers that appropriators then appropriate toward. So it's kind of like, let's say your household budget, let's say you have a budget for the year, and you say, okay, we're going to spend $5,000 on entertainment and $20,000 on food, right? Those are big numbers. It's not your total budget, it's a part of your budget, but they're big numbers. And then you'll decide how to meet those targets of, in my example, food or entertainment, right? It's the same thing in the House and the Senate, right? The budget committee passes top spending numbers. It's not specific, but it's top spending numbers like defense, non-defense. You know what I mean? That's usually what they argue about. But, you know, big numbers that then the appropriators appropriate toward. It doesn't go to the president, and it's not a law. So it sometimes gets really confusing, but it just guides the appropriators. So if you hear the House Budget Committee passed, you know, a budget and it does X, chances are, you know, that's what they think, but the Senate might think something differently. So you just have to kind of compare them. And really, it's just an argument, usually over very large numbers, in this case, trillions of dollars, usually, or at least billions. But what you want to look at and pay a lot more attention to are the appropriations. Here's where the, you know, I forget the expression, something hits the road, but rubber hits the road. This is what you want to concentrate on. There are 12 appropriations bills every year that set individual spending levels for individual agencies. So if you look at, by the way, just if you ever want to look anything up, you go to house.gov or senate.gov. It's that simple, and then you can noodle around. There's all kinds of stuff you can find. If you go to the Appropriations Committee, and I mean, it's as simple as typing in Senate Appropriations Committee or House Appropriations Committee, you'll see where they are in the deliberations. And there are subcommittees with jurisdictions of certain agencies, right? So let's say you have an agriculture related contract. Your bill or the specific bill is going to be deliberated by the agriculture subcommittee. Okay, so first the subcommittees deliberate it, and then it moves for full committee consideration. So there's 12 bills, and they include not only the numbers, like the millions of dollars that are going to be appropriated to, let's say, farm support, ag support, in my example. It also includes specific instructions to agencies called directives. That is something that I pay the most attention to, honestly. And I work the hardest to get the language in the bill. Directives tell agencies, give directions from the House or Senate Appropriations Committees about what to do with the money. So that's really important. When you combine all 12 bills, that's when it's called an omnibus bill. I'm just giving you a few terms here. And an omnibus bill means it's all combined together. And as I said, it usually passes, you know, at Christmas when legislators want to go home and are willing to make deals to get there. It means for people like me, advocates and lobbyists, it means that on Christmas Eve, yes, once again, we are frantically looking at bills, trying to make sure everything we wanted got in it. And then a continuing resolution, which is another term that you certainly hear a lot about, just means that continued funding after the failure to meet October 1 deadline, that's what is called a continuing resolution, okay? It just means it keeps, a continuing resolution just keeps funding at the same level as last year until the Congress can pass funding for all 12 bills. This is, by the way, always a matter of contention because it's tough on contractors. Continuing resolutions mean no new starts. It's tough on people that get federal grants, means no new starts. And so it just, and also it means bridge contracts. So that's another clue, I guess, is to think about bridge contracts when somebody like me says, oh, I think there'll be another continuing resolution and the government won't be funded until in detail until the end of the calendar year. So that's another reason why you kind of want to pay attention to this. Next slide. So I'm going to go now in a little more detail about funding the federal government and the budget process. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so just how it's supposed to work. So I'm explaining the appropriations process to you and the budget process. Here's kind of the timeline. The president is the first one, as I explained in our, earlier, first one to put out the budget. And that's usually in February. The committees all weigh in, the congressional committees all weigh in to the Appropriations Committee about what is under their jurisdiction that they would like to have funded and at what level. And that's called the Views and Estimates document. And that's usually done in March. So if you want to influence the process, or let's say your congressional delegation on funding, you might start paying attention to the relevant committees that are funding the programs and check in with them to see what they intend to propose. So that's the start of it, and those are due in March. Budget committees draft their resolutions in March as well, and remember I said those are the big top line numbers that appropriators have to abide by. And budget resolutions are due, their deadlines are usually April 15th. Do they meet those all the time? Heck no, but that's when it's supposed to happen. Appropriations bills are drafted. That's the next step in the process. And that's usually in May and June. That's when the appropriations committees and the subcommittees under them start drafting the bills. That's when you need to make sure that the letters of support for the programs that fund you are given to Congress. That's when you advocate basically for yourself and your programs. That is the basic time frame that happens. Now, the House is very good about meeting their deadlines. They pass most of their appropriations on time. The Senate, however, is none of the above. The Senate never gets anything done on time, least of all appropriations. So, but when they're supposed to happen is May, June, and then it's supposed to go to the House and Senate floor in July and through September. They negotiate their differences in September, and then the final bills are passed by the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. Now, that's how it's supposed to work. Let's go to the next slide. And here's how it worked in 2022 for funding for FY 2023. as you can see, not much happened on time. They did get the members got their and the committees got their requests in by March 30. Yes. The appropriators started drafting their bills in June. Okay. And then it all fell apart. Congress passed 3 continuing resolutions from September 30 to December 30. In other words, they missed all their deadlines. They did not finally pass any individual appropriations bills. Instead, they passed the continuing resolution, which we just went over, funds the fiscal year at the same levels as the previous year. So finally, in December 29, 2022, President Biden signed the actual appropriations bills, all 12 of them, which were all combined into one omnibus bill. I'm using that other term, to finally pass a detailed appropriation/budget for spending for the rest of the fiscal year, which of course ends in September. So really, you only had, you have very few months for agencies to shove these changes up and understand them out the door. It just kind of jams up the works when the Congress is late on their appropriations and their budget. Now, to be fair, this has happened, I think, only 3 times. I'm forgetting the statistic. I should have it in front of me, but I think it's only 3 times in the last 46 years has the Congress actually gotten all of their appropriations done by the end of the fiscal year. So that's why everybody knows about continuing resolutions. The other part that I don't have in this slide, but I'll just briefly mention is the worst scenario is if the negotiators cannot agree on a continuing resolution and decide to shut the government down instead. And that's when it's really problematic. That's when you have to make sure, if you hear those kinds of rumors, that you've got your capital in place, because it can take a while. I don't know, and I don't have a forecast about what will happen this year, but I anticipate it might be pretty contentious. So, I just have my ducks in a row and think about, what resources do I need to run my business until the end of December, because that's, I think, very likely. Next slide. So just so we can start following this year's appropriations and budget. I said that the expected release is March 9th. That's when the president releases his budget. That's really when it starts. And then the House and Senate appropriations bills are next. Those are the ones you're going to start paying attention to. And we just have the links there in case you want to start doing that. Again, it's not very complicated. The OMB is where the president's budget ultimately ends up, and it's a document. And then the House and Senate appropriations bills, you can see it's just appropriations.house.gov, appropriations.senate.gov. It's pretty easy to find. Okay, next slide. I talked about the continuing resolution, so we'll skip that one. I also briefly mentioned that shutting down is the worst of all worlds, and basically all non-essential functions are discontinued until new funding gets into place, which is why it's problematic. But agencies now prepare for that much in advance. But it's something I think that any advocate, anybody who's a contractor would communicate to their congressional folks. Look, it's important to us and the small businesses that provide services and products to the government to have a funding stream that's logical. A shutdown is terrible. A continuing resolution's not very good either, because, you know, our funding's on hold and, you know, kind of grinds the government to a halt in a sense. And then just the debt ceiling, I'm just saying this because you'll be hearing a lot about it. It's another point of contention in the kind of budget realm. It'll happen this year. And the debt ceiling is just the legal cap that Congress sets on the amount that the Treasury can borrow. And it's on things that are already, money that's already spent. It's not for new money. It's living up to paying the debts on money that the Treasury already spent. So you'll hear more about that. It kind of gets all mixed in with the rest of the budget process. I think the government's going to run out of, or needs to raise the debt ceiling. I think it's sometime in July or sometime in the summer. And as you probably read, negotiations are already starting because there's a lot of budget. There are a lot of budget arguments, I would say, that enter into the debt ceiling, don't have anything to do with the debt ceiling, but things like deficits are talked about. Excessive government spending is talked about. I mean, all of those kind of budget issues are raised when the debt ceiling needs to be raised. Ultimately, I think nobody gets too excited about the debt ceiling because somehow it's always raised. But there's a lot of, I'll use a very sophisticated term, kerfuffle. There's a lot of kerfuffle around the debt ceiling and raising it. But ultimately, nobody really wants to be responsible for having the US default on its debt. Next slide. Okay, so I'm now going to go through the process of finding the program money. We've talked about it. You know that the budget is the overriding numbers. You know, appropriators are congressional committees that actually fund the programs that contracts are used for. And so now I just want to go through and hopefully some examples about how to actually find the program money. I don't expect that we're probably going to go too fast to be able to follow along here, but when you get the slides, spend some time going through these next ones. Next slide. Okay, so we talked about, the first thing is you've got to find the 2023 appropriations law, omnibus appropriations law, okay? And this is examples, right? I can't get you the 24 because that's just starting. So we're going to use last year's, and I think even a year before that to give you good examples. So as we talked about before, you go to appropriations.house.gov, and you'll see on the slide, there's legislation. You want to click on that. And that's where it all starts. So let's go to the next slide. After you've gone to the clicked on legislation, then you want to find which bill, right? So on the left, it says select House legislation by fiscal year. You can also see, by the way, the appropriations. If you wonder like, oh, what process are they in? If you use step 2, right, and look at that set of clicks that you can do, you can see that you can also see hearings, you can see markups, and you can see enacted legislation. By the way, a markup is literally the Congress marking up the document, right, with a pen to make changes to numbers that are current, that come in the draft. So that's what a markup is. Okay, and then step 3, use in this example, in our examples, you want to select FY 2023. So that's the next step. Choose which year. Next slide. Okay, step 4. You want to get the right subcommittee. Remember we talked about subcommittees who are grouped by agencies of jurisdiction. So there's an agriculture subcommittee, there's a foreign affairs subcommittee, I think. There's one that has jurisdiction over Treasury. I mean, you see there's a Homeland Security one, there's a financial services one, there's all kinds of subcommittees that have jurisdiction. So you want to find the right subcommittee. You will arrive at the page that lists all 12 subcommittees. And that's why there's 12 bills, by the way, there's 12 subcommittees. Click on the bill for the subcommittee that covers your program. And I'm just saying, you know, for your contract, right? Let's say you have an FBI contract. You'll want to find the subcommittee that has jurisdiction over the FBI, for example. But this example that I'm going to use now is finding program money at CISA, and that's in the Homeland Security Subcommittee. And you see, you click on bill to get the actual bill. You click on report to get those directives. Next slide. Well, what if I don't know which bill covers the agency I'm looking for? You can look under each bill by selecting the text below. The text below says, click here for all activity related to the FY 2023 Homeland Security bill. And then you select jurisdiction, which tells you which bill and what the bill covers, right? So it's not as hard as it may look because you've got those 2 things you can click on. Next slide. Okay, so you found where your agency is. Now you can find your programs. Return to the page FY 2023 bills and select the bill you're looking for. In our example, we're looking for funding for the State Homeland Security Grant program at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure and Security Agency, CISA, at DHS. And you click on the bill text, which is the next step. Okay, next slide. And here's an example of the text. And I told you I use Control Find to search through bill text because it's so laborious. Also, the other pro tip is you can open it in Viewer or PDF and download it, and you can much more easily find it by word, right? To access the results, rather than trying to do it straight through the page on the Appropriations Committee. So download in PDF or open it in Viewer. It's that little, I never knew what it was, but it's a little box almost in the center of what pops up. And then for us, in this example, we just did Control Find State Homeland Security Grant Program. And what do you know? There it is. And there was 520 million, am I right? For the State Homeland Security Grant Program under the Homeland Security Act. So that's the kind of language you should be able to find when you click and through the bill text. Okay, next page. All right, next slide. The complete text of the bill can be found on congress.gov. That's another way you can find it. If you don't want to go through the Appropriations Committee, you can go through this. Congress.gov, you should familiarize yourself with it because it has an incredible amount of information. And you could, in this case, you would just search for Consolidated Appropriations Act 2023. That's the official name for the omnibus that passed. We give you a shortcut to find that text. And again, the text is all there. There's no mystery. It's all there. Next slide. So I told you how to find the program numbers and the funding. Now let's talk about finding directives. Go ahead. Directives are instructions in the reports. And remember one of those slides before here, it said bill or reports. This is the reports part. They're called explanatory reports that accompany the appropriations bill. Appropriations committees use directives to include their recommendations to agencies, and any member of that appropriations committee can add a directive if his or her colleagues agree. So honestly, that's what I spend the most time doing, is looking through the directives in the bill to see if there was any direction given with regard to a program that I care about. Committee recommendations not only tell them how to spend it, but they also put restrictions on it. And my favorite restriction is called none of these funds. And what that means is if you see none of these funds shall be used for implementation of the WOSB program, let's say, at SBA, if you see something like that, that means the Congress is not spending one dime to implement that particular program. It's saying, no, we're withholding our money. We don't like what we see. And I gave you that example because that actually happened. When the Women-Owned Small Business Program, I helped lead the fight for 11 years to get the Women's Procurement Program in place. And one of the fights was to make sure that SBA did not implement a program that was just absurd that they that was proposed. It would have only allowed set-asides for 4 programs, and one of them was like ATVs, and another one was cabinetry. It was just pathetic. So we went to the Congress, or I went to the Congress and said, we cannot have this go into place. It is an insult to women, and we have to have a much more robust program from the SBA. And so, what do you know? Out comes the report, and it says none of these funds shall be used to implement the WOSB program proposed by SBA. And that was that. So it brought SBA back to the drawing board to come up with a program that we have today, which is much more expansive. And while I think it needs more work, it definitely was head and shoulders above the other program that they were proposing. So just a little example. Okay, so make sure you see those directives because they're really important. Next slide. Okay, so how do you find directives? You go back to 2023. I'm taking you back to find the bill report. Remember I said bill and report. So now this is telling you how to find the report and the example like I just showed you. And like before, you PDF it for easier access. Next slide. Okay, now you're going to search for the directive. Example, you're an IT company who's done past work in cybersecurity infrastructure, and you want to know if there are any new program changes coming. So you go to the report, you hit Control Find, and you type in cybersecurity. Next slide. You can start clicking through the results. And sure enough, when we hit cybersecurity in this example, accreditation of third-party cybersecurity service providers was something that was a directive, and it encouraged CISA to develop standardized requirements for third-party cybersecurity service providers. That was, that was something that everybody cared about, especially small businesses, saying it's too confusing. There's a lot of different providers. We don't understand, it's really tough to figure out. And so here is a pretty detailed directive from the Congress about what they'd expect from CISA when developing the standardized requirements. And by the way, they better develop standardized requirements. Okay, next slide. Why are directives important? I think that we've already kind of covered this. They're important because, unlike agencies, the Congress is open to your views, especially if you're a constituent, or a committee is interested in your views if you are an expert on, a contract that you're executing that makes you an expert in a particular program. They're very interested in your thoughts. And so this is a really good way of influencing the outcome of the funding that they're going to decide. Agencies target money, priorities. And I'll just skip this, but basically, the president in my example, the cybersecurity example, the president had an executive order, and then that said, this is important. And then the agencies start all putting, their actions and how they're going to implement it. And then Congress funds it. And all of that can be you can basically start finding out that information by looking at these very directives, by looking at the budget, understanding how to use it. You can use directives to identify agency goals. Yeah, they'll tell you if they don't like something, like in my none of these funds examples. They tell you about upcoming projects, grants, RFPs. There's all kinds of ways to use the information that you found in the directive. Next slide. I'm going to switch now to the second part of my presentation, which won't be long, and it should only be about 10 more minutes, I think. But now that I took you through how to find the budget, what to look for, how to find appropriations, what to look for, how to think about the contracts you have and the programs that you want to promote, all of that is part of, as I said before, business intelligence. If you see that there's a directive that's getting rid of your program or consolidating your program that's funding you, then you better go fight for it. And who better to fight for it than somebody that understands the value that it brings? And, that's what big companies do. They have whole teams of people that do that. And small businesses can do the same, maybe not at the same level, but small businesses can be really compelling advocates for programs and program outcomes. I just thought I would also switch over to the second part of this presentation, which is, having you think about elevating your business through unconventional means. So I'm not talking about the usual business development, all that advice about how to reach agency people and how to talk to them. I'm just talking about thinking about elevating your business to make an impact. So let's go to the next slide. I think the most compelling part of a small business presentation to an agency is to elevate the owner's profile. I can't tell you how many times I'm like, oh, I'm on a web page and I'm like, that business looks pretty interesting. I wonder who owns that. And I go to the contact page and it just has contact, info at whatever the company is. It doesn't tell me about the leadership team. It doesn't tell me about the owner. It doesn't tell the story of how they got there, how they started their business, if they have a good story. Like, it tells me nothing. It's just a bland website that doesn't stand out and could be one of 10,000 websites that all look alike. And I have no information about the company. As you know, agencies care about that, right? They care about the company, the size of the company, the health of the company, who's at the helm. And small businesses in particular who are trying to stand out really need to elevate the owner's profile. A government guide to federal contracting said, despite all the rules and procedures, people ultimately make the buying decisions. And so think of yourself, and I'm talking to you who own businesses, think of yourself as the differentiator, right? Buyers are interested in the story of your company, and you're the very best person to tell the story. Can your BD person tell the story? Yes, they can tell the story, but they're not going to tell it as good as you are, right? They're not going to remember every little detail that you want to emphasize like you will. And so, I'm just telling you, getting the owner in front of an agency buyer is really important. Your BD people can go after, they can then follow up. But if you, as the owner, can tell your story, that's the most compelling thing, I think. And how do you do that? Well, you have to elevate your profile, and your profile also lifts your employees in your company. I've seen this time and time again. There are a lot of business owners that are like, well, this isn't about me, and I want it to be a team effort, and I don't know, I don't have a very interesting story, blah, blah, blah. And they miss that their team and their team would really love if they got out front and told the story, because it elevates them and it elevates their ability to make an impact, right? And to follow up. Strive to be known among your potential customers. You just cannot be, one little person in the background. If you're going to undertake, government contracting, and most of you, I think, in this audience probably have, your potential customers have to get to know you. And also, you started the company, you're probably the best expert. So establish yourself as an expert. And my next slide says, but how? And so let me just tell you how in the next slide. Participate in public forums, get out there, right? I'm just telling you about when I started this company 20 years ago, I definitely got out there. And I knew I was doing something right when somebody came up to me and said, Anne, you are absolutely everywhere. There isn't an important meeting that I go to that I don't see you there. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing my job, because people recognize that I'm at places and at forums that matter. There's small business roundtables, lots of them. There are small business roundtables in agencies. There's small business roundtables in Congress. There are in Washington loads and loads of nonprofits that have expertise in a particular area that hold roundtables and information. There are events. By the way, another easy way, or maybe not so easy, but definitely effective, is to get involved in boards and committees. Like, it's okay to be part of an association, but to me, it's pretty much a waste of money to be part of an association if you're not involved in some aspect of it. You should get to know your board members. You should be on a committee. People will start talking about you. In other words, you're creating a buzz by doing this kind of thing for you and your company. There's federal, state, and local political discussions, right, that you can get involved in. So remember, the Congress appropriates the money that ultimately comes to you in a contract, right? There's a direct ROI. So in my opinion, one of the worst things a federal contractor can say to somebody, either in the Congress or at an agency, is when something political comes up, or just, they talk about politics like people talk about sports, right? It's, just kind of information sharing. If somebody says, "Oh, I don't touch that," what a big mistake. Why don't you just get informed and become part of the conversation? It doesn't mean you have to be taking political sides, but be conversant. For example, this whole presentation, know that the budget process is about to start, right? So you're talking to somebody and you say, "Yeah, I know I know the president's budget's coming out March 9th. I'll be very interested to see what he proposes for program X," for example. That's a political discussion, right? That's adding information that the person might be interested in, but it's still political. So I'm just telling you, you can take action as well. You can write relevant letters like support for programs. You can testify before Congress. Our company elevates a lot of companies to appear before Congress because agencies like to see that. If you're testifying before Congress, you're not a crazy person. You are a solid business person in their opinion, and it really matters. And then you can also become an advocate. You can be an advocate for yourself. Advocacy opens doors, raises visibility, makes you part of the conversation. That's all part of elevating your profile and elevating what you have to say. Okay, next slide. Here's another but how. Okay, so how do I elevate? Okay, you've convinced me that I should elevate me and my company's profile, right? But how? One of the things that I think is most compelling is hire a professional social media person. They're not nearly as expensive as a PR firm, right? They're not going to big major news trying to get you in the Post, but they're going to write some really great communications for your LinkedIn communication. So think about hiring a professional for those kind of business related social media outlets that people pay attention to. And I'm using LinkedIn because I just think, everybody I know is on that. It has a lot of really good information, and it's a really good network. Website, big mistake, as I said before, to have a bland one with no information. What a lost opportunity when you could be telling that government buyer or a congressional person, they all look up your website. You could be informing them and looking good as opposed to, them getting, just kind of looking, their eyes glazing over and going to the next person. You can also, and the other thing I would say is start writing or hire a writer, right? Blogs establish expertise. And so, that again is lifting your profile. That's making sure that people know you've got expertise and making sure that you are elevating your company as we all hope to do. And I think we have one last slide. Okay, I think this is the last slide. So I'm just going to say, weigh in. If you're going to elevate your company, you're going to start doing some writing. You're going to have a professional or a team member that's very good at writing, good communications. Weigh in on procurement policies that affect small businesses. That's a perfect thing. Stop talking about it in every small business gathering. Start doing something about it. Weigh in on it. Send a letter to Congress. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do that. that are more effective than just talking amongst yourselves. Get to know federal agency officials through participation on panels and forums for your industry. Ask a good question which introduces your company. That's one of my favorites. You know, I'm going to add, when a speaker is finished, I like asking a good question, but then I get my little pitch in. Ann Sullivan with Madison Services Group. We provide government relations services to the small business sector. My question is, and then I ask some informed question that shows that I'm an expert. Become conversant, as I said, in the political realm, because agency priorities follow congressional and White House priorities. And then just lastly, you're the face of the company. Be strategic about your contacts and how you position your company publicly. Your employees will follow your lead. And with that, I've concluded my remarks.
Okay, thank you so much, Anne. Outstanding information. Lots of great information on both the budget appropriations process and great insights and suggestions for the VIPs on how to get their story out to government officials, potential partners, and clients. Lots of really great tidbits. So now we have time for questions. I am going to just to remind everyone, please submit them in the Q&A box, not in the chat. And let me, Anne, if I can read them to you and then just give you time to respond. So let's go. Chris Conklin had a question about, can you elaborate on relationships with congressional reps? And in your experience, will they advocate for businesses in their district?
It's not hard to start a conversation with a congressional rep. Again, you just kind of need to know where to bump into them or where to find them. And our experience is that they advocate for businesses in their district. They'll go to great lengths to do that. They're really interested in helping constituents. Where do you find congressional reps? Okay, so some people attend fly-ins, right? There's congressional fly-ins. A lot of organizations have them. That's one way you can do it. You can simply call their office or submit a request saying, "Hey, I'd like a few minutes to talk to the representative or a staff member about what my company does. We're government contractors, and what's important to us." They'll meet with you. That's what you pay them. That's what they're paid for. And so there's no mystery. The other thing that I like doing is I like going to town halls. They have those in their districts all the time. You don't have to even travel to Washington. Them in their districts all the time. Just pay a little attention or call the office, and you can meet with them after the town hall. It's so simple. And usually, some town halls are really well attended, but others, not so much. So it's a really good way to establish a relationship. If you really like your representative or your senator and you want to support them, wow, there's no better place to get their attention than if you write a check for their reelection. So fundraisers are really easy ways to get to know them, but you also get to know all of their supporters and people that support political representatives and senators, right? They are generally very successful people, right? It's usually the business community. So, it's a whole new network that you just may never have thought about. And an individual can contribute to, don't have to spend a lot of money, but you can contribute. Your company cannot contribute, but you individually can. And that can really open doors as well. Not necessary to write a check, but if you support the politician, that's a really good way. I'll tell you very quickly. I just relocated to Raleigh, North Carolina. I don't know a soul, right? I saw a Senate candidate that I really thought had a good message. So, I wrote a little check and went to a fundraiser. I got to know a whole bunch of political people, a whole bunch of movers and shakers in that city in like 1.5 hours. And there was my network. So I'm just saying that's an easy way to do it, but you certainly do not have to write a check, and everybody will care about what your message is. No doubt about it.
Okay, next we have, how did you balance participation in local politics without being branded as one side or the other? And did you stay apolitical?
So it's assumed that if you support your senator or your representative, that doesn't necessarily mean that you support their political party. Everybody expects, and this is certainly true in the business community, everybody expects that you're going to support your delegation, but they do not expect that you are only going to give money to Democrats or only give money to Republicans. They're expecting that you are supporting your delegation. I actually won an award for being the most bipartisan lobbyist in Washington. And how did I do that? Well, I made sure that my contributions were kind of even-handed. But basically, I support people from both parties that I think care about small business. That's my barometer. I don't base my contributions on hot political topics like, social issues. My agenda is the business community, the small business community, federal contracting, and is this person helpful or not? And so I don't think it's terribly hard to stay apolitical. You can just kind of disregard the partisan noise from both sides. Now, there are extremes, and I'm not, there are extremes in politics, and there are some politicians that I just could not write a check to no matter what, because they're so extreme, right? Because I'm a centrist, I'm not an extremist. So, there are people that there are candidates that are just too political that you kind of can't abide by, but most of them, when it comes to business issues, are pretty balanced and usually have something pretty good to say about small business.
Okay, next we have, my question is, how does getting out there, quote unquote, lead to contracts? My situation seems to lead to joining boards and committees, but not contracts.
My situation seems to lead to joining boards and committees.
Yeah, I think, just
I'm not sure I understand what this means.
I think it's just saying, that she's joined some committees and boards, but it hasn't led to contracts.
It hasn't led to contracts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's all about the network, right? So the more people you touch, the more likely is it'll lead to some kind of, contract in the end. But there's not a direct line. I mean, I think about my own situation, and I'm not a government contractor, but I just think about my own situation. I may have met you 3 years ago, right? At some, I don't know, or sat on a board with you, but you never said anything until 3 years later. And one day you just came up to me and said, I've been thinking about working with you. Yeah, I think I'm ready. Really? I mean, that's kind of what happens to me. So I think there's not a direct line, but I just think the more you rub elbows with the right people, the more you expand your network, the more you're out there, it's just bound to lead to better results for actually getting contracts. Now, that doesn't mean just talking and networking is going to get you to that place. I'm just saying, because all the hard work about understanding federal contracts and how they're, I mean, all of the process, and government contracting is nothing but process. All that process has to be paid attention to as well, but you're more likely to be successful if in fact you've met people in that realm, or you've made an impression that you may not even be aware of that will lead to a connection.
Yeah. Much of it is about timing, right? Yeah. So right place, right time.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. I mean, but literally, and at least in my case, it doesn't happen. I mean, sometimes I met somebody 5 years ago and they pick up the phone. I'm just saying it's, there's no direct line, but just keep working it is, I think, what I want to say.
Great. Is it effective to build relationships with legislators on appropriations committees relevant to our business? And what about their staff?
So if you're not from the district, let's say, so I'm just going to use this example, right? Let's say you are from Massachusetts and you reach out to the head of the House Appropriations Committee, who is Rosa DeLaura from Connecticut. You're not a constituent of hers. So you're not going to ask for a meeting with her. You're not a constituent. She has a million other things to do. But you can ask to meet with a staff member. Or you can have your representative be the conduit to the appropriator, right? So give you an example. So I needed to know somebody at a subcommittee that I I just didn't know them. And the staff there is incredibly kind and helpful, but really busy during appropriation season. It's kind of like CPAs are during tax season. So I used a mutual friend to make the introduction and ask for the meeting. You can do the same thing. Let's say you're from Massachusetts again. You can go to your congressional representative and say, I'd really like to talk to an appropriator about the importance of this program. Can you help? And that's how I would approach it if I'm not from their district. If I'm from their district, hey, you better listen to what I've got to say and you better meet with me because, I sent you to Washington. So that's a different story. You can be pretty insistent. Now, sometimes the folks on the Hill are really busy because they have very small staffs. You'd think they'd have many more than they do, but they're small staffs. So sometimes they're too busy to answer your call. So I look if you go to house.gov, you can look up every representative and they'll have their office number. And if you look, there's offices in their district as well. The district people are not nearly as busy as the people on Capitol Hill, generally speaking, and are paid to do nothing but respond to constituents. So that's what I just recently did when I wanted a meeting with somebody on the Hill. They didn't answer my call. So I called the district office and just said, hey, I'm trying to have a meeting. Could I talk to you first? Or can you connect me with the person in Washington? I only need 10 minutes of time, but I'd like to start the conversation. And so I do lots of workarounds and try to find commonality, but the district offices are a gold mine that a lot of small businesses just don't understand or get. They think they have to come to Washington and they don't.
Okay, next we have, what publications do you recommend I start reading for government contracting? Or are there any popular speakers on social media I should follow to stay abreast of the government contracting scene?
The publications that I read on government contracting is GovExec, Politico. So GovExec is like procurement news. Politico, because it gives a lot of political information. By the way, any news organization, no matter if they're trying to slant things or not, will ultimately end up saying something that sounds like it's slanted. Okay, so just bear in mind that you can't take it word for word. So Politico, I think during the Trump years, I think it's safe to say, couldn't stand him, right? So they seem to be slanted a little more toward the Democratic side. But now that Trump is not there, it seems to me to have shifted much more to kind of, innocuous reporting. But they have so much inside scoop and so much insight. It's worth reading. The other one that I love is Punchbowl News. And you have to subscribe. It's free, but you have to subscribe to their newsletter. And it's a very entertaining form of writing. So it's entertaining to read. But they also, they talk about scoop. They're on top of everything. For more established news, I would say established business communication with respect to politics, BGov is, stands head and shoulders above all others in terms of breadth of subject matter. And they send alerts like as soon as something comes up that you care about, it's in your inbox. But that is a paid publication, and it costs a pretty penny. So you have to make sure that it's something that you want to read. But they also have a government contracting part of it that gives you all the intel on any government contract in a reasonably easy to understand manner. And so with those two combined, to me, it's definitely worth the money. It would just depend if it's worth, you'd have to decide that. If I want to know what's going on in small business, I go to the House Small Business website, and I go to the Senate Small Business Committee website. Those two websites will tell me basically what's going on in small business in the Congress. I know they have social media. Some are good about it, some are not, some congressional folks. But they tend to be able to keep their websites up. So that's another place I look. I read all of the major publications, news. I read all of that with a critical eye because honestly, most of the time I know more than they do. So I tend to look at the mistakes. So I kind of stay away from them, but I look for specific. There's also Federal News Radio has government contracting news. That's always a good source of information. Am I missing anything? FCW. There's one or two other contract specific ones. And the other thing is there's contract specific organizations, and I follow them, especially on LinkedIn, because they're following this stuff every day. And so I get a lot of good information from just following them on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, as I said before, is one of my go-tos just because it has a big GovCon community. However, this is individuals weighing in. So sometimes they really get it wrong, but it seems like, then there's 15 people telling them they got it wrong. So, but it's also, I think, a really good source of kind of GovCon news. And I'll stop there.
Okay.
By the way, Courtney, thank you for that comment.
Yes, I was going to read that one at the end. Awesome. I would agree. Awesome presentation. Next question. I'm active duty Army and retire in December of this year. Are there any groups I should be involved with that champion veteran-owned small businesses? And are there any organizations I should follow?
Well, if you're a woman, and I don't know who asked this, but I invite you to take a look at a small group that we started, which is Women Veterans Business Coalition. We started it because the folks on the Hill kept on coming to us complaining that women, military women or women that had served, didn't have a voice. And every time that they asked for witnesses or participants, all they ever got were, male suggestions. So we started this group. We have maybe, I'd say 20 people or so. We're not looking to make it huge, but we'd love more members. And it's a really good little group that's dedicated to advocacy. And so we're always looking for solutions and working on solutions rather than, sitting around talking about, the world is terrible. So that's one that I invite you to support. If you're a company, you could certainly support us. We'd love that. If you're a woman, we'd love for you to join us. There are a whole bunch of other much more established veteran organizations. And I think the way that you can figure that out is every quarter, there's an interagency committee on veterans, and I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but we brief this group. So it's a presidential appointee interagency committee it's both individuals that are veterans and also government officials that participate. And it's an open forum. It's every quarter. And so you can just learn so much by dialing in. But what I would recommend if you're looking for orgs is look to see who is attending and who is speaking and who are the members, because in one way or another, every major group of veteran advocates is involved in that quarterly meeting.
Okay, there's one sort of specialized question. I'm not sure that you can answer this, Anne, but I'll read it. Is it possible for small trucking companies, 1 or 2 trucks, to get federal contracts or federal funds directly or through big trucking companies?
So actually, believe it or not, I've represented some people like this. So generally speaking, you are going to be a sub, not only on a larger trucking company contract, but as part of another service. So let's say somebody has an environmental cleanup project, right? A couple of trucks may be necessary for hauling it away or, for some kind of transport with respect to that cleanup. That would make you a sub to a bigger service offering. And that's actually what I think I found a lot of, was that it wasn't be a sub to a larger trucking company, because you could try, but and I know that there's definitely dedicated trucking companies that do this for the government. You could go to GSA Advantage and see what kind of that's a website at GSA, and figure out who holds those. It's pretty easy to figure out if you know what you're doing. But I would say that a couple of trucks is more likely to be part of a larger service contract that needs some transportation. I would start with looking at the Corps of Engineers as a possibility, because that's all about transporting, that's all about heavy equipment, building dams, building, right, roads. So I think I would go that direction, and you can by doing research on some of the websites that have government contracting information, I think you could probably find a pretty good answer to your question. If you can't, you should send me a note after this. And, it's not a tough thing to figure out, kind of, if you know what you're looking for.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned GSA Advantage, by the way. Our presentation on Thursday is going to be from GSA. So they're going to show you.
Oh, that's perfect.
Tools. Yeah, so perfect that you mentioned that. So there's a question about the quarterly meeting that you just mentioned, and do you have any details on that?
I hate that I can't remember, like official names. Let me just look in my inbox for 1 second to see if I can remember the official name.
And I'll just note to everyone that we're just about running out of time. So if there's somebody said VetForce, is that right?
Well, VetForce VetForce is an organization that participates. Here's the committee. They're going to have a March meeting, and it's ACVBA is what the person calls it. So let me see. That would be Veteran Business. Here's who you can ask. The person who runs it is Laura Wages, and her email is Laura, LAURA .wages, WAGES @SBA.gov. And she should be able to tell you when it is. And the acronym that she uses is ACVBA.
That might be the advisory committee on veteran business.
Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's
what it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good, sure.
Thank you.
There's several advisory committees around government, but this sounds like a good one, right, for veterans issues.
And you'll see either my daughter Elizabeth or I will brief the committee, so you'll see a familiar face.
Perfect, thank you. There's just one last question, and I don't know if you have enough time for this, but what is the best way for a small business to leverage the administration's AM Forward program, additive manufacturing supply chain program? Does that mean anything to you?
Hey, you may have actually stumped me.
Okay.
Let me see. Is it in the answer open questions? I don't see the.
Yep.
Let me just look
towards
for
the
it.
end. It's the last one, last real question there.
Last one. I think this is the one from Commerce, that's run by Commerce. If so, there are all kinds of resources and people at Commerce that are dedicated to the manufacturing program, and especially they're worried about the supply chain part of it. I would start with the Department of Commerce. And as you know, every agency has a small business program, but you could start there. I do not know anything beyond this. I know that there's also a manufacturing, like a consortium that's run by, I want to say National Science Foundation. I'm not quite sure who runs it, But if you do some digging on commerce, if you've already tried to make something work and you can't, then you know what I would do? I would go and talk to my congressional person about how to best leverage it. And, do they know about it? Can they help you figure it out? That's what I would do if you've tried the agency and you haven't had a lot of luck.
Okay, I think we're done. We got through all the questions right on time, and thank you so much. Really, you were very generous with your time. We really, really appreciate, and I think the audience as well is very appreciative of all the great information, and for taking the time to answer all the questions. So thank you so much, and thank you to our participants for attending this session, and to the SBA for making this webinar possible. So please join us on Thursday. We're going to have our second session of this group at 11 a.m. and we're going to have Richard Schreiber from GSA. He's going to talk about market research tools. Believe me, you don't want to miss this one. It's really, really great information. I've seen the tool and it's great for doing market research. So we will see everyone on Thursday at 11 a.m. And thank you again. Really appreciate your time. And take care and talk to you soon.
Well, thank you, and go forward and advocate.
Yes, it'll do. You as well. And see you in
All
Norway.
right. Okay, thank you.
Take care. Thank you, Ann.